Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is taking place to mark Children's Mental Health Week. Today we have an audience joining us via This Can Happen and Employees Matter. So we welcome you all wherever you are in the world, and we are delighted that you're joining us today and hope you find this session useful. I'm just going to go through some quick housekeeping. The session is being recorded and you will receive a copy within the next 24 hours. There is a question box on the right hand side, so if you have any questions, just pop them in there and we'll read them out anonymously at the end. I think that's everything, so I'm going to hand over to you, Suzanne.
Thanks Mandy, lovely to be here. Thanks for having me. My name's Suzanne Alderson. I'm the founder of Parenting Mental Health. We're a global charity and community that supports around 25,000 parents of young people with mental health issues. I have to say today that I'm going to share with you things from my own lived experience and my learned experience, but I'm not a medical professional. I hope that what I'm going to share with you today will be helpful, will give you some hope and give you some tools to approach your child's mental health. Just a word of warning though, I will be talking about suicide, not in depth in the next slide. So if that may be triggering for you, please obviously keep yourself safe. And also, even though I'll try and keep this as light and helpful as possible, this is a heavy subject. So just be aware of anything that comes up for you, any emotions or any responses that are in you, and just be really gentle and compassionate with yourself. So I thought it would be helpful to start by sharing my story, to give you some of the context around the work that I do, the support that we offer, and what I've learned over the last few years. So my daughter, Izzy, on the screen now, it was around when she was about 13 or 14, she started to withdraw a little bit from us and started to be a little bit more quiet, sleep a bit more, withdraw from her friends. And what we thought was hormones, typical teenage behaviour, was actually a sign of a sustained bullying attack by two pupils in her class. And I have to hold my hands up and say that I did actually overlook it for a long time. I thought that if I just loved a bit more and, you know, we just carried on and life would carry on and time would pass, it would all be okay. And she wouldn't actually let me go into the school. I was looking at the problem. I wasn't looking at the, I was looking at the symptoms really of it, that she was withdrawn and it was making her unhappy. But what I wanted to do was to go and speak to the school and ask them if they would do something about this. But she wouldn't let me do that because she felt her trust would be breached. Eventually, my husband actually went and spoke to the school and they agreed to move the bullies out of her class. And we thought that everything would be okay. And we had a long summer holiday ahead of us. And I remember her saying to me in the September, "Mum, I've got this." And she was so hopeful that this change would make a difference. Later that day, I actually got a phone call from her. It was one of those typical first days of school, you know, assembly at lunchtime and go off and see which clubs you want to join. So it wasn't until the afternoon that she actually went into her class. And the school had forgotten to move the bullies. And I had a very distressed phone call from her, very distressing as well, shouting, screaming and crying down the phone at me that the bullies were in her class. And I later found out they were sitting next to her as well. They put them either side of her. And that was the start of a very sharp decline in her mental health. And before long, she wouldn't even go into school. She couldn't get into the nurse's office, and we'd sit in the car for an hour and then go home again. And about 2 weeks after this had happened, she'd stopped eating. She'd stopped sleeping. She was very, very anxious, very low in mood, and we couldn't get her out the house. And so I took her to see our GP, who referred her to CAMS, the Child Adolescent Mental Health Service in the UK, and with about a 9 to 12 week waiting list. And now after the pandemic, 9 to 12 weeks would be delightful as a waiting list. But even then, I just couldn't cope with the thought of 9 to 12 weeks of this. I just simply didn't know what to do. And so he suggested we came back each week until the referral came through. And the following week we went along and Izzy asked if she could go in on her own. And when they came out, the doctor said to me, "Just go home, I'm going to give you a call." And that phone call really changed the whole trajectory of our whole family life, because he said that she disclosed that she had a plan to end her life imminently. She'd stockpiled medication and she intended on taking an overdose that night. She felt so impotent to make any change in her life. She felt so hopeless that nothing would change. And she felt that the only option that she had was to end her life. She was really fortunate because she was seen by CAMHS the next day and put on a program of medication and therapy. And it was a very challenging time for us for about 2 years. She was out of school during that time, and huge change happened in our whole family, having to adapt to this new normal that we were facing. But as parents, there really wasn't any kind of support for us, not only in terms of how do we parent this? This is a whole different paradigm, but also in terms of how we dealt with our emotions around it and how we dealt with the fallout of this experience. And so one night, sitting in her room on suicide watch, I decided that if we made it through, that I'd make it my mission to ensure that no other parent felt like I did. And about 9 months after she first attempted suicide, because she did after that subsequently, I started a Facebook community which has morphed into a charity that supports around 25,000 parents. Now, this stat is one that I'm sure you're familiar with. It's a really arresting number, and it's not unusual for us to know. We know that children and young people's mental health is declining, but I share it because when I was going through this, I felt so alone. Nobody spoke about it. Nobody wanted to make eye contact in the CAMHS office. And what I wanted to do was to really shine a light on the fact that you're not alone in this, and neither was I. Unfortunately, those numbers are increasing, and where we see the gap in services, where young people can't actually access them, we as parents are having to cope with situations that really we shouldn't have to. We're not trained for, we're not resourced for, and sometimes, without being rude, we don't actually have time or capacity for. We recently did a survey in the parenting mental health community, and out of 1,327 parents, 612 of them said that they had a child who was suicidal or who had suicidal ideation and had been told by their community mental health team that they didn't meet the criteria for care. So those parents are left dealing with that. And so I hope today what I can do with this survival guide is give you some tips, hints, some resources that can help you to cope whatever your child faces, whatever mental health challenge comes into your family. This is the PMH curve, and I developed it really when I started when Izzy was very ill, and I've developed it over time, and it's been influenced and impacted by thousands of parenting mental health parents. And I created it because I really didn't have a way of understanding what this journey looked like, because nobody talks about poor mental health in young people. And they certainly don't talk about what the prognosis is for them. How long might it last? What's going to happen next? As I explained earlier, I spent most of my time hoping that we were going to get through this, but I didn't realise then that there were things that I could do to affect change, not only in Izzy, but in our family as well. So what we see is that slow descent can last for quite a long time. So as Izzy was in a slow descent phase for probably about a year or 18 months, but then something happened. It can be a traumatic experience. It can be a loss of trust. It can be a misunderstanding around somebody that's significant to the young person. And that can turn what is a low-level mental health issue into something that is much more difficult, dangerous, and acute. Why we use the curve is to give parents hope, to say, we don't know what your journey is going to be like, but some of the things that we'll share today in this presentation may help you to bridge the crisis. So you might not be able to avoid crisis altogether, but what you can do is slow it down, not make it quite as deep, and also understand where your child is as well as where you are. Because so often as parents, we just see this as a problem to fix, and sadly, it's not. And I know that we're all here because we care about our children and we want to support their mental health. But as a parent, I really think it's important that you consider the impacts on you. So I felt so guilty when Izzy, when I found out that she was depressed, when she was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, a borderline eating disorder, suicide attempts. What kind of parent allows their child to do that? Now, I had huge guilt about it. And actually, the shame of that as well really consumed me. And it made being present as a parent a very difficult thing. I blamed myself. Did I work too much? Did I not work too much? Did I say yes or no at the wrong time? There were so many emotions that I was dealing with that it was really important for me to recognize those so that I could get some support, so I could start to work my way through them. And there's a couple on here. You might identify with some or all of them, but I just want to identify with highlight a few down the bottom. That loss of attention and identity change. You know, I ran my own business before Izzy got ill, and with my husband, and I had to give up work for 8 months to care for her because it was a 24-hour-a-day job. And I lost that ability to be present at work, to hold facts in my head. And then I also lost my identity through that. I suddenly wasn't me. I was a carer on a different path. I was taking care of her 24 hours a day. And, you know, that had an impact. And you might think, well, I'll ignore that because my child's more important. And what I would say to you is you have equal parity in this, and your child's recovery and their future doesn't just depend on them, it depends on you as well. So I know that people talk about self-care the whole time, and I want to just cover off some of these points because actually, you know, self-care isn't bubble baths and avocados. Self-care is about acknowledging the kind of weight of experience that you're carrying. And I think acknowledging what your child is going through is a gift that you can give them. And then acknowledging the fact, and there will be grief coming off of that. You might have lost a sense of what your future will look like, or your child's future will look like. So it's really important that you can find some help for yourself. Peer support has been essential for so many of the parents that we support. Just finding other people that understand what the reality of living with a child with a mental health issue looks like and feels like. So I would urge you to find help for yourself. It's not weak. It's a really responsible, powerful thing to do. And coping looks different to everybody. So I cried a lot. I'm a big crier. But you might find that you work more, or you eat more, or you exercise more. Coping looks different for all of us. So you just need to find what is your optimum way of getting through this. And just to remember that, you know, there should be no judgment around this. I know there's a lot of stigma around having a child with a mental health issue, but there shouldn't be any. Please don't judge yourself. Please don't judge your child, and try and find a way that you can let it out. Try and find a way that you can connect with other people. I used to go and walk in the fields around our house and shout at the top of my voice because I just needed to release it. So however you need to cope, you are carrying a large emotional load, and you need to recognize that for your own mental health benefits, and they in turn will help your child too. So the rules have changed. You are not parenting a child any longer. You are parenting a child with a mental health issue, and that is not the same. So a few things I want to share with you are that you can't fix this. And as parents, that's innately what we do, isn't it? We make things right, we gloss things over, we push our family forward. But unfortunately, that can't happen when your child has a mental health issue. So you can influence this, and I'll talk about how in a moment. But I just wanted to put that out there. You can't fix this. And by fixing it, what it does, it can often negate the experience of our child. It can make them feel that they're not heard, they're not seen, they're a problem, they're a diagnosis. So it's really important that we try and move away from that fixer mentality and see that this is an opportunity. Even though it's a difficult, dark one, it really can be an opportunity. And you can influence what's going to happen. And finally, you're not a failure. I definitely felt that my parenting journey came to a dead end when Izzy attempted suicide. But actually, I wasn't a failure. There are so many inputs into her mental health. There are so many things that have brought us to this place. And what I'll share next is how I moved through that, and how thousands of the parents that we support are using this approach to build connection and build safety and a safe space for their child. So this new approach we need some way of changing our behaviour. We can't fix this. We can't force our child to change. And we're often battling to get access to services, to deal with school, to deal with our employer or our team or our relationships. So we need a new approach, and we need to look at this and say, I can't keep doing what I've been doing before. A new approach is needed. And I call this partnering, not parenting, because, well, you'll find out in a moment, but our traditional parenting is often the thing that can damage our relationships more. And that position of authority, that top-down approach, can really isolate our children at a time when they really do need us to be present and on their side. And sometimes love, our love comes across as anger. Sometimes our fear comes across as frustration. And so what partnering, not parenting does is gives you a framework to approach the situation and to build a really safe, supportive and trusting relationship with your child through better communication. If there's one thing that you take away from today, I would love it to be this. This is effectively the kind of heart of partnering, which is step down, stand beside and travel together. Now, this isn't just a kind of a woolly concept that I came up with, one night sitting on suicide watch. This is something that has been tried and tested, not only by me, but by, as I say, thousands of parents. And it's not only an approach to how to look at your child's mental health, it's also a way for you to help you make decisions in the moment. So I often find myself saying, what do I need to do now? And eventually it becomes second nature. But sometimes we need a way to make a decision. So I'll talk you through each of the stages now. So stepping down is probably the hardest part, because what we have to do to step down is acknowledge that there's a problem. We acknowledge that there's an issue, a change is needed, and that the life that we knew isn't going to continue in its current form. When your child has a mental health issue, and when their power has been taken away from them, and if you think about Izzy with her bullying or experience, or any of the other places, maybe your child is neurodiverse and they find the school environment very hard. When they're disempowered, they effectively become traumatized. And I don't use the word lightly, because power is the way that they get that sense of emotional security, that they can regulate and that they feel safe. And when we're facing a really challenging experience, like our child having a mental health issue, depressed, anxious, maybe they're out of school, maybe you're tearing your hair out, all the things that they can't now do, it's really easy to try and exert our authority as a parent. So stepping down from our authority position says to them, there's parity here, we're on the same side, we're on the same level, and I don't understand your experience because I'm not you, but I'm here to listen. And that's really hard, because does that mean that we're no longer responsible? No, it absolutely does not. But what it does mean is that we're not going to take the lead on this. We're going to listen to our child. We're going to believe them. We're going to be compassionate when we engage with them. And we're going to allow them to show us what they are going through, to show us how they need to be regulated. And when I talk about regulation, what I mean is that emotional safety, so that they don't feel that they are going to be forced to do something that they can't do, that they're going to be belittled, that they're going to be talked over, that they're going to be judged. And so often, inadvertently, we do this as parents because we're really busy. And so stepping down is a process and a practice, and something that can really help us to create that space with our child. We also need to step down from our own emotions. I know that when Izzy was ill, my goodness, I was consumed by it. I felt so sad. I felt just absolutely wretched and desperate at what we were facing. And so when I mentioned earlier about taking care of yourself, stepping down from my emotion about how things should be and how I should react needed me to take care of myself. It needed me to find somebody to go and talk to, and to make sense of my own experience. And also stepping down from your own experience. I struggled with my mental health in my teens, but Izzy growing up in the 21st century was a very different proposition. So stepping down from knowing what she might be feeling or how she might need support, and really listening and allowing her to come to me and share with me what she needed was really important. And this allowed me to be an advocate for her. So I was able to then use my authority, not against her or over her, but in the conversations that we had around her care. So around not getting her admitted into an inpatient unit, which was one of the things that was proposed to us. So I was able to be an advocate for her because I understood what she wanted, and I was able then to effectively communicate that with her care team. Standing beside your child is equally hard, and it's one of those things that we have to do over the longer term. But what this means is it gives you an opportunity to create an environment where they feel safe. So that is trusting them, that is believing them, that is advocating for them. And we spent many days, as I say, Izzy was out of school for 2 years. We spent many, many days where I looked around and thought, gosh, if anyone else could see this, they would say, why isn't your child in school? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And actually what she needed was that time. She needed us to slow everything down, for me to be present, for me to be patient with her, and to allow her to go through this at her pace. And I know myself, you know, I'm a huge rusher. I really want to get through everything. I'll probably finish this early, but I just want to get through, you know, I did want to get through life really, really quickly. And, you know, if we could just get through this stage, it would be okay. And standing beside your child in their pain is a hugely powerful thing, and it's incredibly difficult to do. But you do know your child best, and so what you'll find is the more you stand beside them and say, I'm going to listen to you, I'm going to advocate for you, then they will share more with you. So this creates that space where they can express what they're going through. And shifting expectations and assumptions was a big deal for me. You know, letting go of what we thought our life was going to look like was really tough. But what it did was it started to reduce her anxiety. It gave her that sense of feeling that she wasn't in need of being defensive the whole time. And it gave her a space where she could start to recover, which she did. And then the last part is traveling together. So this is about encouraging that agency. I've said before that, you know, if you feel disempowered, then you are going to be dysregulated. That's where that kind of crisis, that fight, flight, freeze response comes from. So encouraging agency in your child and taking that different path that mental health or poor mental health has put you on is really important. So setting a plan for what's next. As I said, Izzy was out of school for 2 years, and most people would say, well, she didn't learn anything then, and I will counter that. You know, she took herself, and we supported her on many journeys of learning. There were lots of skills and strengths that she gained from those 2 years, not least becoming a top 500 player on a game that she did, but she taught herself to cook, she learned philosophy, she taught herself to sew. But most of all, she taught herself what she needed emotionally, and setting that plan, traveling with her on that journey patiently, sometimes not quite so patiently, because obviously there's still this kind of, you know, cadence to life that you want to get your child back into. But actually what it did was it made a space for new opportunities. And so she's now doing a degree. She's in her last year at university, living independently. And she's doing something she'd never have done if we'd have pushed her back into the world too quickly. By giving her the space to share with us what she thought was important, it's enabled her to find what she really does love. And I know this is really hard because sometimes you think, well, that's not practical, that's not realistic. But actually, this isn't about the right plan. This is just about the fact that your child starts to believe that they have a future, that there is hope, and they do have agency over what is going to happen. I want to just say 2 things here as well about, there's one of the points on here, don't forget the person inside, you or them. I think it's really easy when we look at mental health, because it's scary, because we're afraid of it and we don't know where it might lead, for us to try and minimize it and try and look at a diagnosis and try and seek out the diagnosis, because we think then we'll have answers and understanding. A diagnosis can be really helpful because it can get you the right level of care. But what I see in a lot of parents is that it becomes what their child is. And their child isn't their diagnosis. Their child is an amazing individual with their own hopes, fears, dreams, strengths, weaknesses. And a diagnosis doesn't cover that. So just a reminder to not forget the person inside. And also don't forget the person inside you. As I mentioned earlier, I became I had a whole new identity, becoming a carer. And so it's really important that you keep doing the things that make you you. And also, for your child to see that as well. I remember Izzy once saying to me that she had felt that there was there was an obligation whenever I stopped doing something. She felt that as an obligation on her, that she'd in some way, her mental health had some way stopped me from doing the things that that I wanted to do. So really important there that this is a complex thing. It's not straightforward, it's not easy, and it does take time for you to start to react differently, to change your communication style and skills. And one of the other things that I would say is don't ask your child too many questions. We have a bit of a joke of zipping it in our community, because as parents we want to understand all of this. We want to, if your child says, I'm interested in, I don't know, whatever it is, you then want to know all the details. And actually, that's not important now. Ask from a curiosity perspective, not from a practical perspective. So challenging your assumptions, exploring your emotions. This is a really challenging time. But if you can travel together, you will come out of this with a relationship that looks very different. And I think it's important to say that you can't go back to where you were. So if you're facing this at the moment, acknowledging what you're going through and being prepared for the journey ahead is a gift for yourself and also for your child. I also want to say that the future's really bright as well. And going back to that point around mental health being such a heavy subject that we're not quite sure about, and we look at why it's happening and we try and unpick all of that, and for great reasons. If we can improve it, absolutely so important. But I think it's also really heavy that we think that this is going to be a defining time in our child's life. And actually, it will be a defining time, or it could be a defining time, but it doesn't have to be a negatively defining time. And that could be for you as well. So maybe this will take you on a different path, like it's taken me, but a different timescale also is okay. I get a lot of questions from parents who say, should I, my child's been out of school for the last few months, particularly after the pandemic, should I force them to do GCSEs this year or any kind of exams? And it's like, well, what is right for the child? We have to live our life as a parent if we're looking at our child's mental health in this way. And we have to put them at the center of it. So timescales, it's okay. There's always time. Learning continues. Education can happen at any point. And there are also lots of opportunities that come from this. I think the biggest thing that we can do as parents, though, is to really believe in our child, really believe in their future. And holding on to that hope can be really, really tough. And I know that that's why peer support has been so vital for so many parents. Finding somebody else that understands it, finding someone else that can sit with you while you do make sense of that big, dark ball of, fear and uncertainty and loss is really important. But also showing you, and I hope today that I can show you, I've showed you a little bit, that there is definitely hope for young people, and there's definitely hope for your child if they're struggling now. I've written a book, mainly because I wanted this book when I was going through this, and it's really a companion guide for you to understand partnering, not parenting. I've obviously had to give you a whistle-stop tour today, but also to understand all of your emotions. I really believe that as parents, we have such a vital role to play in our child's recovery, in our child's experience, and this is a real lesson for all of us to create closer, more connected, more compassionate relationships. The book has details about partnering in it, and also some more about our experience. And if you're interested in finding out more about parenting mental health, and the details are on the website details are on the screen now. and my email address is there. I'm very open to comments, feedback, or if we can offer you support, then we're very happy to. I just want to go through some of these resources, and I'm sure you'll be sent these through after with the recording. But part of my initial response to Izzy's diagnosis, illness, and the circumstances was to get a plan. And so I'd really consider doing that. It's not necessarily a plan that you would share with your child, but it is a plan that will make you feel in some way that in a situation with no control, that you have some control. So some of the resources on here I just want to talk through. So Young Minds is an amazing charity that works with young people and also has a parent helpline. They have, if you call them, then you can get you'll get a you'll speak to somebody, and then they'll give you an opportunity to speak to a child psychologist, and that will give you some of the insights into maybe what's going on with your child. As we know that the waiting lists around the world for care are getting longer, and so we are going to have to find ways to mitigate the impacts of poor mental health in our homes. So definitely advocate speaking to Young Minds. If you have a specific diagnosis around an eating disorder or some of the other disorders, then definitely look for specific help for that. I've put parenting mental health on there because we have a number of guides for parents which may be helpful for you. And there's also a great new parents toolkit that's come out from the City Mental Health Alliance. So definitely, I would definitely look at these and go and do a bit of Googling, try and make sense of it. I think the key is, though, is to be led by your child again. If your child can't get into school, that's not a won't. Sorry, it's not a, it's a can't, it's not a won't. So they're not being belligerent, they're not being, challenging, they're not saying no and, being rude. They can't do it, and the sooner you can listen to that and support them, the better. So school, in the UK, you don't have to have a formal diagnosis for you to have authorised absence. So it's important to start to understand where you sit legally, because actually schools have got some great resources in place. There's lots of ways that they can support young people and children to get back into school or to deal with transitions between primary and secondary school. And there's some great organisations like Square Peg and Not Fine in School and Sendias who can give you the kind of support that you need. Obviously, these are UK based. And then some resources for young people as well. And I think it's important that you can give young people the opportunity. And again, I don't think this is something that you can push them to. This is a case of, oh, I found this and, it might be interesting for you. I know that a lot of the young people from the parents that we work with have used some of the online apps and messaging apps like Kooth. STEM4 has a number of them around self-harm, around anxiety, and then also obviously, and this goes for you as well. If you're struggling and you want to talk to somebody, then the Samaritans are always there. And I wanted to just highlight that means that if you're just feeling a bit low today and you need to have a chat with someone, then you can call them. You don't need to be suicidal. You don't need to be in crisis. I have a friend who is a volunteer, and he has someone who calls him up to say goodnight every night that he's on, or she phones every evening to say goodnight because she lives alone. So I think really the more that we can give access to other people and really kind of blow open the challenges of this, the better. And obviously there's the shout text line, which you can use as well. A final brief piece around neurodiversity. We have seen a lot of parents saying that if their child is diagnosed as autistic or with ADHD, then they struggle to get access to mental health care. And I think the point is that these things can be comorbid and you should fight for that support. But understanding what it might be like to be neurodiverse in a neurotypical world will go a long way to helping your child understand their brain and their superpowers that come with being neurodiverse. I'm going to finish there. I think we've got plenty of time. We've got lots and lots of questions, so I want to make sure that we get access to those and have time to to answer them. So thank you. If there's any comments, I'm very happy to hear them, or if there's any questions, please put them in the question box as well. Over to you, Mandy.
Yeah, we've got quite a few questions coming in on the question box, and we've got quite a lot beforehand. A lot of people saying as well in the question box, thank you for sharing your story about your daughter and yourself and what you went through. It really helps. So I'm going to try and drop between the two. So first question, my daughter is going through a real difficult time at the moment, suffering lots of intrusive thoughts which lead to her having anxiety attacks in school or being too anxious to go to school at all. Almost 14, so similar age to your daughter. Any advice or help that you could give on that one?
Definitely. Well, I think 14 is a really tough age, and particularly for girls as well. When it comes to school, I think I would be going and speaking to school straight away if you haven't already. And as I said earlier, your daughter doesn't have to have a diagnosis for her to get any access to support. But I would also not be afraid of a little period of maybe some deschooling. The key here is to try and get her to a place where she's emotionally regulated. And if she's going into an environment that's traumatic for her, then she won't be emotionally regulated over time. So that's something as well. Mandy, sorry, can you just repeat the beginning of the question again for me? I just, that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. She's going through a difficult time at the moment, suffering a lot of intrusive thoughts, which leads to her having anxiety attacks at school.
Okay, so thank you. It will be interesting to know, and I'm very happy to, if you want to email me, to know whether the intrusive thoughts are around school or whether it's the fact that she can't regulate her emotions when she's in school. But I would be speaking to her teacher, speaking to the head of her year, speaking to the SENDCO. I'd look on the school's website and look at their policies around mental health care and support, and their SEND policies, their special educational needs and disabilities policy, because mental health is often covered under that. And I'd also be talking to your daughter about it. You know, how can we help you? You know, what kind of support do you think you need? And she might just say, I don't know, Mum, and you can say that's fine. But I think it's a case of open that conversation up and ask school for support with her knowledge and her blessing, and also, you know, just try and keep it as calm as possible at home. Try and keep yourself as calm as possible. And yeah, just really sad to hear it, and wish you all the very best. And yeah, please keep in touch, or please get in touch if you'd like some more info.
If you have mental illness that runs in the family, what can you do to help protect your children and teach them about keeping their mental health healthy? About a 10 and 8-year-old who are both very sensitive and showing some signs of anxiety.
Okay. Well, I have this. We've had this question a lot because my husband has a family history of mental illness, and Izzy's psychiatrist basically said, yes. I mean, there is actually research that shows that you can see research for both sides, but there's research that shows that there is, you know, the genetic link doesn't necessarily equate to, you know, your child having a mental health issue. What I would say is that it's really important as a parent that you take care of your own mental health and you look at yourself in this and think, how can I strengthen myself? So if you need some therapy, if you need some emotional support, go and find that. And to be present and to be patient with your child is one of the biggest gifts you can give them. And it sounds really simple, but actually it really works, because a lot of the time that anxiety, you can start to talk through it. We have a guide which you can find on our website on what to do when your child has anxiety. You know, and listening to them is the top thing. How can I listen to them? How can I make them feel safe? And we can think that's a really easy thing to do, but you know, if we're not feeling emotionally safe, and I don't mean that we think that, you know, a wolf's going to come out and bite us or anything like that, but if we're struggling ourselves with anxiety, it can be really hard to be emotionally present for our children. So my first thing would be make sure that you're emotionally well, mentally well. And secondly, you know, start to look at how you can build that relationship with your child. How can you be present? How can you be patient? And how can you listen to the anxieties that they've got, not to encourage them or reinforce them, but to understand them so that you can start to look at ways that can negate them, reduce them, and help them to feel a little bit more safe.
I think that one leads well into how best to avoid absorbing your child's emotions and maintaining your own happiness.
Great question. There's isn't there that phrase, a parent is only as happy as their least happy child, something like that. And I know myself, it's really hard. It's so consuming, isn't it? You just feel so overwhelmed by it. I think I've covered this a little bit, taking care of yourself and seeing that actually the way that you take care of yourself is modeling behavior for your child. So if you are not taking care of yourself, if you are overlooking your own needs, if you're not eating well, if you're, drinking too much, working too much, effectively using low-level harming techniques to get through coping, but harming techniques, then actually what does that say to your child? It says that, you don't know how to look after yourself, that they're a bother and a burden, and you can get into a swirl with this. So I actually had to have a chat with myself. I had to have I gave myself a harsh talking to and said, you need to take care of you, because if you're not resourced, then you can't be present for her. So I would just really advocate that self-care, and also get out and don't immerse yourself too much in mental health stuff. I do it day in, day out. And when I go out or if I go to the theatre, I went to the theatre the other weekend in London, and my goodness, it felt like I'd seen a whole new world with loads of different colours in it. So make sure that your life isn't only about your child and their mental health. Put other inputs into it that are positive, because there is definitely hope and you can get through this.
Thank you. Do you find that other family members can also feel like they want to fix, so they need this message too? So it's also your siblings, aunties, grandparents, they could also be unhelpful and put pressure on the parents to fix.
I couldn't possibly comment from my own perspective. No, I definitely could. Yes, absolutely. And in fact, actually, when I was talking earlier about stepping down from emotion, I was thinking of my mother, who turned up on my doorstep in floods of tears when we'd just come back from a very intense psychiatric appointment. Definitely. What we find is that actually most people don't understand this, and the fear of it leads them to say, well, if you just make them do this. And that comes back to the fact that if we don't respect the child as an individual, as a human being with their own thoughts and feelings and fears and hopes and dreams and all the rest of it, then we're always going to be in that place where we think that this is something that we can fix and manage. So yes, I would definitely suggest that we've had a lot of parents buy their mums, dads, husbands, wives the book, because it does cover it in there. And I think sometimes understanding someone else's story and understanding that your child can be really feeling this. They are feeling this. This isn't something that's made up. They're not trying to get out of anything. Most young people want to be outside, seeing their friends, exploring the world, moving on. And if your child has a mental health issue, they can't do that. It's not that they won't do it or they don't want to do it. It's that they can't. So I think definitely you are not alone. I feel your pain, and it's really important to surround yourself again with that peer support, people that understand the challenges that brings, and also to just remember why you're doing this. You're doing this because you love your child, and they're the center of this. They're the most important thing. And some of the views of potentially older generation can be quite jarring, because they do come from that authority position, and unfortunately what we find is that just disempowers the child more and moves them further away from us. So yeah, but I definitely feel for you there.
I think this one's come through the YouTube link. My daughter is only 5 but is struggling at school with relationships, which is leading to anxiety. She started the behaviour of picking her skin and nails as a way of coping. She's prone to aggressive outbursts when in a dysregulated state. Most resources are aimed at older kids. Any advice or point in the right direction to get help?
Oh yeah, five's young, isn't it? And that's so difficult for you, and it must be so hard to see that, and so hard for her. Yeah, if you drop me an email, I will put you in touch with an organisation that can give you some specific ways of supporting her. But I think one of the ways that might be helpful, which is actually on the anxiety guide on the Parenting Mental Health website, is around a day in the life of. And this is an exercise that you take your child through and do it in a fun way, get loads of stickers, glitter, whatever it is, and just take them through and ask them how they feel. What are the good things about their day? What are the things that challenge them? Obviously, just for you to understand, not to get them into a dysregulated state. And so that you can have an idea of maybe some of the things that you can put in place to support that. So maybe reducing some of the circumstances where they do get dysregulated, but also to speak to school about that and to show them, show school where the challenges are for the child. Because, sometimes in a busy class of children, it can be overlooked. And I think that the key point around the great saying, all behaviour is communication. What is your child's behaviour trying to communicate to you? And your child is clearly trying to, and you're listening to it. It's about making sure that the other people in her life are listening to that too. So if you want to drop me an email, I will send you some resources and connect you with an organisation that does work with young people and children.
Thanks, Suzanne. What signs of poor mental health should you look out for in children? What are the signs?
Well, I mean, I did speak a little bit about this with Izzy, some of the changes in behaviour that you might see. So a change in appetite, a change in sleep patterns, a change in interest. But also we've got the overlay, haven't we, of hormones and a growing brain and all that kind of stuff that comes when they come into teenage years. So really it's about, it's your child, you know them best. So what I would suggest is that you keep a little bit of a diary. If you're starting to see that things are slipping or that they're getting dysregulated by things, overreacting to certain things that they didn't before, then, I definitely start to look at those. But also try and keep an open conversation going the whole time. Try and have a chat with them. We used to drive a lot. In fact, I got told off by Cams for taking Izzy out. It would be 1 a.m. and she'd say, "Mum, I really need to go for a drive," and off we'd go, and she'd have her headphones in, and after about 10 minutes she'd start talking. I think having those open conversations so that you can not necessarily bring up the changes you're seeing, but ask the questions around what's going on here, or just being interested in what's going on. So it's really about creating that space and seeing that those changes happen over time, because we all do this, don't we? At times our mental health goes up and down, but if you're seeing a steady decline, then that's definitely something that you need to flag. Maybe speak to your GP or speak to the teachers at school.
Thank you. We've had this question a few times. When the child refuses to go to therapy, what can you do to encourage them or help them?
Okay. Therapy is really hard work. So just imagine being a young person again. It was a long time ago for me, but I can imagine being a young person, struggling with your mental health, feeling disempowered, feeling dysregulated, not feeling safe, and you're placed in a situation with somebody you don't know, and you're expected to share with them how you are feeling, your deepest, most innermost thoughts. That's a real challenge. So I think the key is that as parents, this goes back to that piece around, we think that this is something we can fix, and if we just get a plan, it'll all be okay. And I've done it myself. If you just go to this appointment, then this person is going to fix it all for us. And the point is that actually that's not going to happen. So coming to a place where you can say, okay, that's your choice, and that's really hard to do. And obviously I don't know the circumstances of your situation, but saying to them, maybe the therapist isn't right. Maybe you need to find somebody else that they can speak to. Maybe you can get them to do some little taster sessions with them to understand whether they're on their same wavelength. Maybe they're not ready, and actually being ready for therapy is a really, really key thing. And you can have therapy at any time. It's not to say that you can't, but that's another thing to consider. And I'd also say to look at the kind of modality that you're going into. A lot of young people might not want to talk. So you might want to use a creative counsellor who might use a different method of communication, might use art or sand or Lego, whatever it is. So I think it's about really understanding that this is a difficult choice to make. It's a challenging space to be in, to expose yourself to somebody that you don't really know. And it takes time to build that trust up. So be really patient with them and curb, if you can, your own frustrations about the fact that they won't go, because I know myself, you just think it will help you, and but they need to be in a place where they're open to that and open to taking on board and having that therapeutic relationship with somebody.
Thank you. What does recovery look like?
Cool. What does recovery look like? Yeah, what does recovery look like? Well, if you remember the curve at the beginning of the talk, sawtooth recovery is that time where you start to hope again, where you've come out of the darkest times and you can start to see a way forward. But it is like a shark tooth, because it's not a linear path. So we know that recovery is something that can happen, and over a long period. And actually, if mental health is a continuum, recovery is the thing that we need to be considering over the longer term. So we go from a sawtooth into resilient recovery, into growth, strong growth, and then putting those skills into place where a child can actually, a young person can regulate themselves, who can understand what's going on. But we have to remember that for young people, their brains are still growing until they're 25. So there's a lot of change going on. So what we might feel as recovery probably isn't what recovery looks like to them. So I'd be looking for the bounce back ability factor. So if something happens, what's their bounce back ability? Do they come back to it? Does it take a day now, whereas before it took a month? And you need to really savor those moments and recognize them for what they are, because we've all been through a really challenging period anyway with the pandemic. But if you have had a mental health issue as well, it's it's a lot, it's a heavy weight. So celebrate those small wins, that it's now a day, not a month. And also recognize that it changes and it morphs, and it needs to be led by them. So final thing on that is that a lapse is not a relapse. So you will have fits and starts. It isn't going to be a smooth plain sailing. And also, don't hurry too much for recovery, although we do desperately want to get out of crisis and make sure that our child is as safe as they can be. If we can still give them the space to recover, so take that pressure off, make them feel emotionally safe, then it can mean that it will take a shorter space of time for them to get back into the kind of things that they want to do.
Thank you. Any advice on what to do when a young person turns to drug and alcohol to help them cope?
Gosh, it's so hard, isn't it? It's so hard. Another sort of self-harming coping mechanism, and one that we really find challenging as a parent. So I would just remind you, all behaviour is communication. So this is some kind of escape, it's some kind of self-soothing, and to keep that compassionate view of this when you might be having money stolen from you, you might be thinking about the kind of effects on their body, you might be seeing them engaging in risky behaviours, is really hard. So I think this is compartmentalising it. So first of all, understanding that this is coming from a place of need in them. And again, it might be because their brain's growing. It might be because they have some neurodiversity, for example, that compels them to kind of take risks or whatever, or it might be a self-soothing situation. I would definitely look for a specific drug or alcohol charity that works with young people. Generally for this, it's not going to be an adult that's going to help a young person out of it. It will probably be a peer who has been through this, somebody just a little bit further along on the journey. But in terms of the parent themselves, understand that this isn't your fault. This isn't a judgment on you as a parent, and please don't berate yourself about it, but go and get some specialist help and support and advice for that, and just try and keep in mind that all behaviour is communication. I'm doing this because I have a need in me that is not being met.
Thank you. Any advice on how to deal with a child who's got mental health issues, but where you've got other children in the household, so they're feeling sidelined?
Oh, it's really tough. Yeah, absolutely. So I think just it depends on where you're at. If you're in crisis, it can be really, really hard, and it depends on the age of the children. So I definitely sit them down and explain that the poorly child is struggling, and some of the behaviours that they might see aren't appropriate, and there aren't necessarily things that the poorly child can have control over. So keeping those boundaries around what is appropriate, and understanding that this is not the way it's always going to be, is so vital. I'd also say about looking at time individually with the well children, the well siblings, so that they don't end up becoming effectively a sub-carer for you or for their poorly sibling. And that's really important, that they get a sense that what their needs are important, and that they can still be met by you. So again, another load on the parent there, another thing to manage. But I would definitely advocate that. And I'd also speak to school. I'd also chat to school about it and make them aware of what is going on. So and make all the teachers aware that homework might not be done because we are dealing with a crisis at home, or they might not be able to attend X, Y, Z because of what's happening at home at the moment. So definitely speak to school. And we've also got a guide specifically on this on the Parenting Mental Health website if you'd like to go have a look on it. It's they're just free. You can just download them from the website straight away. So hopefully that will help.
Thank you. In relation to where you spoke about partnering, how do you include the parenting bit too? There are times where we also have to parent and do things that the child doesn't want, but we have to do it. Any advice?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think this comes down to boundaries, doesn't it? And authority. I mean, it depends on the state of your child's mental health. You know, we were in a crisis situation where she couldn't leave the house. She was attempting suicide. And so a lot of the things that, you know, in everyday life that we might have to parent through didn't really kind of come up. I'd love to know, if you can, in the comments, I don't know whether it's possible, an example of this, because I'd really like to address that directly. But I think the key here is about clear communication and clear boundaries. And we often think of boundaries as ones that we as parents decide on and our children have to comply with. And actually boundaries are the rules of our family, how we're going to, we need to co-create them, how we're going to live together in harmony, how we're going to respect each other's time, needs, wants, voice. So I would be looking at using the partnering, not parenting approach to consider how you can create that space with really positive boundaries and consequence for parents and for children, and also to open up that communication. So it is compassionate, it is patient and present, but when difficulties happen, that you've got a way of moving forward. Because if it's always done after the fact, if it's always done in reverse, then that can lead to a child not trusting you and not believing when you say that you're consistent and that you care and you're present, and that they stop believing that. So yeah.
I think we've got time for just one more question. This person's asking if you've found an effective way to balance the need to give a child agency, but also to push them into something that they are trying to avoid through fear.
Okay. Well, agency and pushing don't work. They can't coexist. But I would be really interested to know what that specific thing is. If that is because you think it's the right thing for them, then I would question why you think that. Because that's coming from a control perspective, you kind of that you want them to do this. But I think in terms of agency, this is a case of, you know, we often think that agency is something we just hand over. We don't. It gradually grows over time. So what I would say is the act of building that agency in your child and with your child, open communication, will lead to you understanding why they're fearful of it. And hopefully from that, you can come to some kind of consensus on whether this is the right thing, and why there's some kind of resistance to it.
In relation to the previous question before, I'm not sure if this one's connected, but it's definitely probably an example. Having a boundary of no phones in the bedroom after 10, but worry that when I enforce it, my daughter will then self-harm in retaliation.
Okay, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a really common challenge for parents. I would be saying, is there a reason? We understand all the reasons about phones. I understand that. But in this time at the moment, does your daughter use her phone as a way to communicate with other people? Does she use helplines? Is she using it as self-soothing? Is there another way you could do that? Could she get an Alexa? Could she get whatever it is that can, play music if that's what she's doing? I think having that conversation to say, as your parent, I really want to support you. Can you tell me, how can I help you? these are the rules that I've got. Can we co-create something together that suits both of us? Yeah, is the way that I would approach that.
Thank you so much. You've had lots of thank yous in the message in the chat box as well, saying how great and informative the webinar has been. I think you're going to get lots of emails as well. So as soon as everybody receives the recording and they have access to the email address, if they didn't jot it down, expect lots of emails.
Excellent, excellent. I will do.
Brilliant. So thank you so much for everyone attending today, and thank you, Suzanne. It's been really informative. Just before we actually say bye, there will be an evaluation form at the end. It'll just take 20 seconds to fill out. If you could fill it out, we'd be extremely grateful for your feedback. So thank you, and once again, thank you, Suzanne.
A pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.